What happens when we die? It's the oldest question we have. Every culture, every religion, every philosophy that has ever existed has tried to answer it. Some say we simply cease to exist. Others believe in heaven, reincarnation, or some form of spiritual continuation. But there is a group of people who claim to have actually been there and come back. They are called near-death experiencers, and their stories are both terrifying and beautiful. Today, I want to take you on a journey into these experiences. Over the next half hour, we're going to explore some of the most astonishing recent near-death stories. We'll look at the common patterns, the bizarre details, and the lingering questions that science is only beginning to answer. By the end, you might find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about the nature of consciousness. Before we dive into the stories, let's define what we're actually talking about. A near-death experience, or NDE, is a profound psychological event that can occur to people who are close to death or in situations of intense physical or emotional distress. These experiences often include sensations like detachment from the body, feelings of levitation, extreme peace and warmth, a sense of moving through a tunnel, encountering a bright light, and meeting deceased loved ones or spiritual beings. Not everyone who comes close to death has an NDE. In fact, studies suggest only about 10 to 20% of people who survive cardiac arrest report having one. And what's fascinating is that these experiences can happen to anyone, believers and atheists, adults and children, people from all cultures and backgrounds. The experience itself, researchers have found, tends to follow a remarkably similar pattern across all demographics. The modern study of near-death experiences really began with Dr. Raymond Moody in the 1970s. He wrote a book called Life After Life, where he collected stories from over 100 people who had been declared clinically dead and then revived. Since then, thousands of cases have been documented. And in recent years, we've seen an explosion of new stories as medical technology improves and more people survive situations that would have been fatal just a generation ago. Let me tell you about Stephanie Arnold. She was a 41-year-old woman living in the Chicago area. She was pregnant with her second child, and everything seemed completely normal. She had a healthy pregnancy, no complications, and she was excited about welcoming her new baby into the world. But Stephanie had a strange feeling that something wasn't right. As her due date approached, she became increasingly anxious. She told her husband, her friends, her doctor, she had this persistent, nagging feeling that she was going to die during childbirth. At first, everyone dismissed her fears. They told her it was just typical pregnancy anxiety, that everything would be fine. But Stephanie couldn't shake it. She even went so far as to record videos for her unborn child, explaining that if something happened to her, she wanted her baby to know how much she was loved. Her doctor eventually agreed to induce labor a couple of days early to give her some peace of mind. When the day came, Stephanie went into the hospital. The labor was progressing normally. She had an epidural, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. But then, something went terribly wrong. The baby was born without any issues, but almost immediately after delivery, Stephanie's body went into shock. She had developed a rare condition called amniotic fluid embolism, where amniotic fluid enters the mother's bloodstream, triggering a severe allergic reaction that can cause cardiac arrest. It's incredibly rare, happening in only 1 out of every 40,000 births, and it has a mortality rate of over 80%. Stephanie's heart stopped. She was clinically dead. Now, here's where things get truly strange. Medical staff rushed to revive her. They performed CPR, administered emergency medications, and after several minutes, they managed to restart her heart. Stephanie was alive, but she had no memory of anything that had happened. For several weeks after, she had no recollection of the birth, the emergency, or any sort of NDE. But she started having terrifying nightmares. She couldn't shake them. They were vivid, disturbing, and they left her feeling shaken and confused. Eventually, she sought help from a therapist who specialized in hypnotic regression therapy. This is a technique where a therapist guides a patient into a deeply relaxed state to help them retrieve repressed memories. Under hypnosis, Stephanie began to remember, and what she described was astonishing. She said that when her heart stopped, she found herself floating above her own body. She could see everything happening in the operating room. She saw the doctors and nurses rushing around her. She saw her own body lying on the table. She could see her husband, who had been brought into the room, and she could see the expressions of panic on everyone's faces. But what's incredible is that Stephanie described events and details that she could not possibly have known. She described specific actions the medical team took, like the exact placement of the crash cart, which hospital staff member was holding which tool. and even a particular conversation between two doctors about what medication to administer next. She saw her husband's exact reaction, the way he looked down at her body, the tears streaming down his face. She said that during this out-of-body state, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. She was drawn towards a tunnel of warm, white light, but then she heard her baby crying. She heard the infant's voice in the distance, and she felt this incredible pull towards that sound. She decided to return to her body, and then she was back, fighting for her life. But the details didn't stop there. Stephanie also described 6 specific events that would happen during the birth and the emergency response. Some of these were things that had already occurred, but others, she said, were still going to happen. And incredibly, every single one of those predictions came true. The medical team was stunned. Her doctor later confirmed that Stephanie had described the emergency room dynamics with perfect accuracy, down to the way team members were positioned in the room, details she had no way of knowing. Stephanie's case has become one of the most documented and studied near-death experiences in recent history. Her story appears in a documentary called Surviving Death, and it has been examined by medical professionals who cannot explain how she knew what she knew. Let me tell you about another remarkable case. This is the story of Ingrid Honkala. Ingrid is a former NASA scientist. She's brilliant, analytical, and not someone you would typically associate with mystical experiences. But Ingrid has died 3 times, and her experiences have shaped her entire life. The first time happened when she was only 2 years old. She was living in Colombia, and her family had a water tank on their property. One day, little Ingrid fell into that tank. She couldn't swim, and she was trapped under the water. She drowned. Ingrid remembers the entire experience. She recalls that as she was struggling underwater, she suddenly felt this incredible peace wash over her. It was a feeling she describes as more real and more intense than anything she had ever experienced. There was no pain, no panic, just a profound sense of calm and joy. She said she saw her body floating in the water from above. She was looking down at herself, a tiny figure in the dark water. But she also saw her mother. Her mother was inside the house, about to take a nap. She was tired, and she had put her head down on the table. And Ingrid, in this out-of-body state, communicated with her mother telepathically. She said she sent this powerful message to her mother that said, "Get up. Ingrid is in the water. You need to save her." Her mother later confirmed that she had been about to fall asleep when she suddenly felt this overwhelming urge to check on the water tank. She rushed outside and saw Ingrid's body floating in the water. She pulled her daughter out and performed CPR, saving her life. Ingrid was revived, but she had been dead for several minutes. The second time Ingrid died, she was in her 20s. She had a severe allergic reaction to medication. She went into anaphylactic shock, and her heart stopped. This time, Ingrid had a slightly different experience. She felt the same peace, the same out-of-body sensation, but this time she also saw a series of visions. She saw her entire life flashing before her, but it wasn't just her life. It was her impact on others as well. She felt the emotions of everyone she had ever known, both positive and negative. She saw how her actions had rippled out and affected people she had never even met. She was revived again and continued her life. But the third death, when she was much older, was the most profound. This time, she didn't just see images. She says she entered a vast, intelligent, interconnected consciousness. She described it as a source of knowledge that was beyond anything the human mind can conceive. She understood the mathematical structure of the universe. She saw how every single thing in existence is connected, how we are all part of one enormous living system. She felt that she was home. She says she was asked a question during this experience. The question was simply, "Are you ready?" And she felt that this was asking if she was ready to leave her physical body permanently, to let go of her earthly life and merge completely with this universal consciousness. She said that she still had work to do, that her life here wasn't complete yet. She wanted to return, and so she did. Ingrid later went on to work for NASA, and she has said that her near-death experiences gave her an understanding of physics and the nature of reality that she could not have learned in any classroom. She believes that consciousness is not generated by the brain, but that the brain acts as a kind of receiver for consciousness, much like a radio picks up signals. When the body dies, the signal continues. There is another recent story that captured the attention of researchers and the public. Brianna Lafferty was a young woman who experienced something truly extraordinary. She died for 8 minutes. Like many others, Brianna was in a hospital. She had a medical emergency that caused her heart to stop. But unlike some experiencers who report only warmth and peace, Brianna's experience was slightly different. She said that she found herself floating above her body. She looked down and saw the medical team working frantically on her. She could see them, but she couldn't interact with them. She heard their voices, but it seemed to come from very far away. But then she started to move. She said she was pulled into a vortex or a tunnel. But this wasn't a tunnel made of light. It was a tunnel made of numbers. Blue numbers. She described it as a stream of blue mathematical symbols, ones and zeros, whirling around her like a tornado. These numbers, she said, represented the mathematical fabric of the universe. She understood them instantly. She understood that our reality, everything we see and touch, is built upon a deeply complex mathematical structure that our brains normally can't perceive. And in the center of this swirling mass of numbers and codes, she saw a being of pure light. It was more brilliant than the sun, but it didn't hurt her eyes. It was warm, welcoming, and loving beyond anything she had ever felt on earth. She felt that this being knew her completely. It knew everything about her, every mistake she had ever made, every joy she had ever felt, and it loved her unconditionally. This being communicated with her. It asked her, "Are you ready to leave?" And Brianna said she felt a moment of pure, complete joy. She was ready. She wanted to stay in that light forever. She wanted to merge with that being and with that source of all love and knowledge. But then she heard her mother's voice. Her mother was in the hospital, and she was crying. She was begging Brianna to come back, and Brianna felt this powerful connection to her mother. It was a bond of love that even that powerful, infinite light couldn't break. She chose to return. She woke up in the hospital bed. She had been dead for 8 minutes. Her mother was there, holding her hand, and what's remarkable is that Brianna remembered everything with crystal clarity. The memory of that blue tunnel of numbers, that swirling vortex, and that being of light has stayed with her. It has changed her completely. She no longer fears death. She knows with absolute certainty that something continues after the body dies. Now, let's look at what happens when you gather stories from many people. Recently, a fascinating study was conducted where researchers interviewed 48 people who had survived near-death experiences, and the range of experiences was staggering. Some people, as you might expect, reported seeing Jesus. They saw the Christian figure with his welcoming arms. They saw angels and felt that they were being judged. But something fascinating emerged. The people who saw Jesus were Christians. The ones who saw Hindu deities were Hindus. Muslims saw Islamic figures and visions of paradise. People who followed no religion often saw what they described as the light, or the source, a loving, intelligent presence. And then there were the extraordinary visions. One man said that he didn't see any religious figures at all. Instead, he found himself in a vast, geometric space. He said he was shown a matrix. This wasn't the kind of matrix from the science fiction movie. It wasn't a computer simulation. It was something far more profound. He described it as a multidimensional structure, like a diamond made of light and energy, where every single possibility existed simultaneously. He could move anywhere simply by thinking about it. He could travel across the universe in an instant. He could see his own life and the lives of everyone he had ever known, all connected in this vast web. Another woman said that she met beings who didn't appear human at all. They were beings of pure consciousness. They communicated with her through images and feelings rather than words. And they showed her the history of the earth. They showed her how humanity had evolved. And they said that we are still in our infancy as a species. They told her that the purpose of life is to learn love, that love is the only force that has any real power in the universe. These experiences are incredibly common. And when you read through the testimonies, you start to notice something extraordinary. These experiences, regardless of the culture or background of the experiencer, have common threads. Almost everyone reports the feeling of being more alive than they have ever been. They say that this life, this physical reality, feels pale and dull compared to what they experienced. They talk about being able to see in 360 degrees. They talk about communicating telepathically and understanding complex ideas instantly. They often describe a life review, not as a judgment, but as a moment of complete understanding. They don't just see their own actions, they feel the effects of those actions on others. It's not punishment, it's education. And the consistent message they receive is that we are here to love, to grow, and to learn. Here's what researchers have discovered. Your cultural background provides what we might call a scaffold for your near-death experience. This is something scientists have observed in many studies. If you're a Christian, the tunnel you experience may be described as a gateway to heaven. The light you see may take on the attributes of Jesus. You might see your deceased grandmother or other figures from your faith tradition. If you're Hindu, you might see Yama, the god of death. You might encounter ancestral spirits. Your vision might align more with the concept of reincarnation, with a sense of moving through cycles. If you're an atheist or agnostic, you might not see any religious figures at all. Instead, you might see something more abstract, like the matrix of numbers that Brianna described, or you might encounter what you perceive as highly advanced beings or a universal intelligence. But here's what's truly fascinating. While the cultural details change, the core experience remains remarkably consistent across the world. The tunnel of light is reported by people in every culture. The out-of-body sensation is universal. The feeling of profound peace, of unconditional love, the feeling that you are more alive than you ever were on Earth, these things seem to be universal features, not cultural additions. This suggests, and researchers have been studying this for decades, that there might be something fundamentally real happening here, something that transcends culture, geography, and religious belief. Yes, the mind interprets the experience through the lens of what you already know, but the raw experience itself appears to be a genuine phenomenon that cannot be explained away simply as dreaming, hallucination, or oxygen deprivation. Let's take a moment to look at what science has discovered about near-death experiences. Because for a long time, many scientists dismissed these stories as just the brain misfiring. They said it was just hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation. They said it was the brain's last desperate attempt to make sense of its own failure. And for a while, that explanation seemed to make sense. But then something happened that changed the conversation. Researchers at the University of Michigan conducted a study where they recorded the brain activity of dying rats. And what they found was extraordinary. Just after the heart stopped, there was a powerful, coordinated burst of activity in the brain, and these weren't random misfirings. They were organized, rhythmic brain waves, specifically the kind of gamma waves that are associated with consciousness, with memory formation, and with heightened states of awareness. But you might be thinking that's just rats. That doesn't apply to humans. Well, more recently, doctors in Germany and the United States began studying human patients who had been resuscitated. They found very similar patterns. Even after the brain had technically died, there were still coordinated bursts of electrical activity. What does this mean? It suggests that death isn't a single moment. It's a process. And in the moments after clinical death, the brain might actually be more active than it is in normal waking life. Some researchers have even suggested that the brain goes into a kind of hyperactive state in its final moments, producing an experience that can feel like it lasts an eternity, even if it only lasts a few minutes in physical time. But this is where the questions get complicated. If near-death experiences are just the result of this burst of brain activity, then why do people report seeing things that happen while they're unconscious? There are hundreds of documented cases where people have been able to describe the medical procedures being performed on them, conversations between doctors, and the behavior of their family members in the waiting room. One of the most famous examples is from a study called the Iwawar study, which was published in a major medical journal. In this study, researchers put hidden images on shelves in operating rooms. The images were placed in a way that they could only be seen from above, not from the perspective of someone lying on the table. The idea was simple. If someone had an out-of-body experience and floated up to the ceiling, they would be able to see the image and describe it. If near-death experiences were just hallucinations, nobody would be able to see the images. And here's the remarkable part. One patient did describe seeing something from above. He described the medical team working on him in detail, and he also described a hidden image that he could not have seen from his body's perspective. This is the kind of evidence that challenges the purely materialist view of consciousness. Now, let's talk about what all these experiences have in common. Because whether you believe these are glimpses of an afterlife or just the brain's final moments, the messages that people bring back are remarkably consistent. First, people come back without a fear of death. This is almost universal. Those who have had near-death experiences do not fear dying. They might still fear pain or suffering, but the actual act of dying, they say it's the most beautiful thing you'll ever experience. There's nothing to fear. It feels like going home. Second, people come back with a renewed sense of purpose. They understand that life is precious, that every moment matters. They stop caring about trivial things like money, status, or material possessions. They care more about relationships, about love, about making a positive impact on the world. Third, people come back with a deep sense of connection to the universe. They understand that we are all connected, that every person, every animal, every tree, every atom is part of one great whole. They talk about feeling a sense of oneness, of belonging to something vast and beautiful. Fourth, people come back with a sense of morality, not a religious morality, but a deeply personal understanding that love is the only thing that truly matters. They understand that the way you treat others, the way you treat yourself, the way you treat the world, this is everything. They understand that our actions have consequences that ripple through the universe. And finally, they come back with a mission. They feel that they have been given a second chance and they don't want to waste it. They want to tell others what they've seen. They want to help people understand that death is not the end. They want to make the world a better place. As I've been researching these stories, I have to be honest with you. I found myself questioning everything I used to believe. I was raised in a tradition that talked about heaven and hell, and I'll admit I had a pretty clear picture of what I thought happened after death. But hearing these stories from people from all walks of life, from all religious backgrounds, has completely changed my perspective. What I find most convincing is the consistency. It's not just a few people having strange dreams. It's thousands of people, over decades of research, having fundamentally similar experiences. And many of them, like Stephanie Arnold, bring back verifiable information that they couldn't have known otherwise. That's hard to explain away. I also find myself moved by the transformation that happens in these people. They're not just saying they had a weird experience. They're fundamentally changed. They're more compassionate, more peaceful, less fearful, and more purposeful. That's the kind of change that suggests something real happened. Now, I'm not saying I have all the answers. I don't. Science is still trying to understand consciousness. We still don't know what it is, how it arises, or why we have subjective experience at all. But what these stories tell us is that there might be more to this existence than what we can perceive with our five senses. There might be something waiting for us after this life ends. But here's the thing, near-death experiences also raise more questions than they answer. If consciousness can exist outside the body, does that mean it can exist forever? If we are all connected to a universal source of consciousness, does that mean we're all just fragments of one being, experiencing itself from infinite perspectives? If there's a source of unconditional love at the center of existence, why is there so much suffering in the world? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why is life so hard? And then there's the big question, if we're all going to die someday, why does it matter what we do with this life? If we're going to end up in a place of infinite love and peace anyway, why struggle? Why create art? Why fall in love? Why try to make the world a better place? The experiencers have an answer to this. They say that life is a school. We're here to learn. We're here to grow. The challenges, the struggles, the pain, these are part of the curriculum. They teach us what love truly is. And the love we experience here in this messy, imperfect world is precious precisely because it's fragile. It's precious because we can choose it. We can choose to love, to forgive, to help, to heal. Near-death experiencers often say that what matters most is not what you achieve, but who you become. It's not the awards or the money or the fame. It's the love you gave and the love you received. It's the lives you touched. It's the difference you made, even in small ways. Let me tell you one more story that really stuck with me. It's the story of a man named Howard Storm. Howard was an atheist. He was an artist, a professor, a man who prided himself on his rationality. He had no belief in God, no belief in an afterlife, no belief in anything supernatural. In 1985, while traveling in Europe, Howard became severely ill. He was rushed to the hospital and he went into cardiac arrest. He died. But instead of oblivion, he found himself in a state of confusion. He felt lost. He found himself in a place of darkness and loneliness. He heard mocking voices around him. It was terrifying. It was like being in a dark forest, surrounded by hostile beings. He didn't know what was happening. But then something changed. He called out for help. He cried out to God even though he didn't believe in God. And suddenly, a light appeared in the distance. It was small at first, but it grew brighter and brighter. And the light was warm and it was loving. Howard felt himself being drawn towards the light. The hostile beings retreated. The darkness faded. And he found himself in the presence of a being of pure love. He had what he described as a life review, where he saw his entire life from the perspective of others. He saw how his actions had affected people. He felt their pain and their joy. He experienced the consequences of his choices. And here's the incredible part. Howard didn't just see his life. He also saw the life he could have lived. He saw the potential, the possibilities, the roads not taken. He understood that his life, up until that point, had been a tragedy. He had hurt people. He had been selfish. He had wasted his potential. But he was given a second chance. He was told that he could go back, that he could change. And he was told that he would be forgiven, that the love that greeted him would always be there, waiting for him. Howard came back to life, and he was transformed. He completely changed his life. He became a minister. He dedicated his life to helping others. He made amends with the people he had hurt. He became a completely different person. Howard Storm has since written a book about his experience, and he says the most important thing he learned is that love is the only thing that matters. He says that we are all connected, that we are all children of the same loving source, and that our purpose on earth is simply to love. So where does all of this leave us? Near-death experiences are among the most profound, mysterious, and debated phenomena in human experience. They challenge our understanding of life, death, and consciousness. They offer us glimpses of something beyond our everyday reality, whether you see them as glimpses of the afterlife, as psychological reactions to trauma, or as something else entirely. One thing is clear: these experiences matter. They matter to the people who have them. They shape their lives, their values, and their understanding of the world. And they offer the rest of us an opportunity to reflect on our own lives, our own beliefs, and our own mortality. If there's one thing that all these stories tell us, it's that death is not the end. Or at least, it doesn't feel like the end to those who have been there. It feels like a transition. It feels like a homecoming. It feels like a beginning, not an ending. And if there's one thing we can take away from these stories, it's a deeper appreciation for life. The experiencers often say that the miracle isn't death, it's life. The miracle is that we're here at all, that we exist, that we can love, that we can grow, that we can learn. So, as we go about our days, as we face our challenges and celebrate our joys, maybe we can take a moment to appreciate this gift of existence. Maybe we can be a little kinder, a little more patient, a little more loving. Maybe we can remember that we're all connected, that we're all part of something vast and beautiful. And maybe, just maybe, when our own time comes, we'll be ready to step into that light, to be welcomed by that presence of unconditional love, and to understand finally what all of this was for. Thank you for listening to these stories. I hope they've made you think, made you wonder, and maybe even made you feel a little less afraid of what's to come. If you have your own story, or if you've been touched by these experiences in some way, I'd love to hear from you. As always, stay curious, stay open, and keep asking the big questions. That's where the real adventure begins. I'll see you next time.